Hello, welcome back. I've mentioned this before here, but I have two main hobbies. One of them is books, and the other one is board games. So far on this channel, I have talked exclusively about the books that I've read, the books that I want to read, things like that, and none of that content is going anywhere. I'm definitely going to continue talking about books here, but I would love to add in some board game content. I'm thinking right now maybe once a month I can do a video where I talk about a game, which is exactly what I want to do today. And what better way to transition from talking about book content to talking about game content than by talking about a game that is in fact also a book. And that game is The 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. This is a game designed by Tim Hutchings, and it's actually available on his website for, I think, $15. You can download the PDF version of the game, or you can spend a decent amount more and get this beautiful physical copy. But you may be wondering, how do you fit a game into a book? How does that make any sense? Well, this is not a board game in the traditional sense. This is more of a role-playing game, or you could call it a journaling game or a creative writing game. This is a game that puts you in the shoes of a character that you create and has you live out their life over the course of tens, hundreds, and even thousands of years. The character that you will create is obviously a vampire, and as such, their life is long and nearly unending. And that's the primary focus of the game. It's focusing on the immortality side of a vampire and the loss that comes along with that. Not only the things and the people that you lose to the passing of time, but also the memories that you have about those things and those people. Which does bring us to something that I think is important, the content warning at the beginning of the book. The creator of the game very responsibly added in a section where they outline kind of how this game might impact you. If you're sensitive to the ideas around death or loss of memory or loss of loved ones, this may be a game that you want to stay away from. I do think that I have some sensitivities to that sort of thing, but I found that I was very easily able to add in a little levity, a little humor into the narrative, which for me was enough to negate all of the dark themes. You are playing as a vampire, and you are going to be asked over the course of the game to create characters that your vampire, who you are assuming the role of, cares for, and then you will inevitably lose all of them, either through their passing or your own. Because yes, you do play as an immortal, but the game does end ultimately in your demise. So how exactly does this game work? Very good question. In a nutshell, this game works by rolling some dice, flipping a page, reading a prompt, and then thinking through how that prompt will impact your character, your vampire. At the very beginning of the book, they mentioned that all you need to play is a 10-sided die, a 6-sided die, and something to use to record your story. I did choose a journal and a pen, but I think next time I play, I would just use my laptop. I thought it was kind of cool to write things down kind of in the same way that my character might have been writing down their journal entries. But by the end of your first playthrough, I think you'd probably agree that it's just an easier experience overall to play this game using a laptop. Not just because you may want to write long paragraphs for your responses, but for honestly so many other reasons. And you'll figure it out as we go, but I'll try to point them out here and there too. So I said you needed dice and pen and paper, but you really don't need the pen and paper. And honestly, there's like a million resources online for just like dice rollers. You can even just Google 10-sided die, and Google itself will give you dice that you can roll. Likewise, there's a bunch of completely free apps that you can download on your phone and just tap the screen and it'll roll the dice. So again, really, what do you need to play this game? The game itself. So now we know what we need to play the game, almost nothing, but how does the game work? Before we get to that, let's define some terms here. The core mechanics of this game are all built around these 5 traits, as the game puts it. There are memories, skills, resources, characters, and marks. So first, let's talk about memories. And with memories, we have to talk about experiences. A memory in this game is a collection of up to 3 experiences. To have a memory, you need at least 1 experience within it. These memories and experiences are kind of the makeup of your vampire. As you play through the game, your vampire takes on new memories. These memories are kind of bucket that contain at least 1 and up to 3 experiences. These experiences are essentially just things that happened. This could be something as simple as I walked down the street and I stubbed my toe, to chronicling your overhaul of some kingdom. They can cover the span of just a few seconds or hundreds of years. And that's entirely up to you and how you are choosing to respond to whatever prompt it is that you are responding to. When you're creating a new experience and you're thinking through what that experience might be, you as the player will comb through your existing memories to find one in which this new experience is relevant. If I have an experience that says that I stubbed my toe, and then later down the line, maybe I see a prompt that I'm in the hospital for some reason, and I have to figure out why that is, and I comb through my existing memories, and I see, oh yeah, I stubbed my toe. And then I can explain that I'm in the hospital because I broke that toe. So that new experience can live with the old in that same memory. If you're asked to create an experience that doesn't really feel like it relates to any of your existing experiences and memories, then you create a new memory and put the experience in that. All of your experiences should be as simple as a one-sentence answer. This is what happened, here's how it impacted me. The thing that makes these memories and experiences interesting is that you are limited to 5 memories. And again, these memories can hold up to 3 experiences. So if I have that memory about going to the hospital and that was kicked off by an experience in which I stubbed my toe, and then I had a new experience in which I went to the hospital, and then maybe I had another experience in which I talked about how it was tough to chase somebody down because I have this cast on my foot. That memory is now at its max capacity. I'm no longer allowed to add new experiences to that memory, even if I'm creating a new experience and it is very relevant to that memory. I still have to create that experience, but now it's taking up a new memory slot. And if I've also already hit my 5 memory limit, then I'm forced to look back through my memories and cross one of them out to make space for the new one. In doing so, forgetting all the things that happened inside that other memory. More on that later. Along with these memories and the experiences within them, our character has a set of skills. These are things that your character can do or might do. For example, you may have a character who's good at fencing, or maybe your character is funny. These are things you can write down as skills. A lot of the prompts that you see will ask you to either check or remove one of these skills. The checking of a skill is a way to indicate sort of that you've done that skill, you've used that skill. If you've said that your character is funny, checking that skill might indicate that they've told a joke. When checking a skill, you want to do your best to incorporate that skill into the response to the prompt. So in the new experience that you're creating, you may want to talk about how you told a joke to this person and so this thing happened. At times this might feel limiting when you're responding to a prompt that tells you to check a skill, but the only skills that you have left seem irrelevant. But I'd encourage you to lean into that and really stretch your brain and figure out how you can incorporate them, because that tends to lead to the most interesting experiences that you'll write. And it also tends to throw the story into a direction that you did not plan. The book even outlines an example in which they say that maybe you're asked to help a friend, but the only skills you have left are rage and kill. So now you have to help that friend by killing someone, which may not be your first instinct when you think about how to help somebody. In other cases, a prompt will ask you to remove a skill, which means that your vampire has forgotten that skill. They don't know how to do that thing anymore. In my first playthrough, my character was actually skilled at humor. And as the result of a prompt, I had to remove the humor skill from that character. And it really did change the entire tone of the story from then on. Somewhat similar to skills are resources. A resource being something that is physical, something that you own or have in your possession. This could be as small as the pebble in your shoe to acres of land to a fleet of warships. There's really no boundaries here. The only real distinction between your resources is that some of them will be defined as stationary. A stationary resource being something that you can't take with you when you walk around. The pebble in your shoe goes with you. The acreage that you own stays where it is. And some prompts will directly say that you lose a stationary resource, usually to indicate that you are leaving the area where you have been existing in. And again, you can use these resources to flavor your responses to the prompts. If I have to help out a friend and I'm told that I have to lose a resource, then I may decide that my character will give that friend something that I own. In one of my stories, my character had a child, and that child carved them a wooden figure. And then later in that story, when that child was long gone and forgotten, my character got a dog, and that dog took a resource, and that resource ended up being the wooden figure that my child had carved for me that my vampire forgot about. And the resources are definitely a tool for the gameplay, but bear in mind that this is not a comprehensive list of all of your vampire's resources. You're not writing down everything that you own. And similarly, you don't have to talk about only things that you've written in your resources list. Your vampire probably lives in a house. You don't necessarily have to write that house down as a resource. You can talk about how you went home or you left your house in one of your experiences without having written down in your resources list that you own a home. So you don't have to write those things down, but you're not able to lose them when the game tells you to lose them, which will impact you later. And we'll get to that soon. I've mentioned a couple times now that you can give a resource to a character or interact with some other character in some way. But who are these characters? These characters are people that your vampire has some sort of relationship with. Again, these should be described generally in a sentence or a sentence fragment. Billy Bob, owner of Billy Bob's Horse Emporium. That's fine. You get his name out there and a little bit about who he is. You can add to these descriptions as you go. If I'm prompted to get into some sort of altercation with a character that I've already met and I choose Billy Bob, I may want to adjust his description after that experience is written down. Billy Bob, owner of Billy Bob's Horse Emporium, a bit of a brute. Or it could even be something more specific to the prompt itself. I stole 3 of his horses. Sure. In some instances, you'll be asked directly to involve a character that already exists, and then in other cases, you'll be asked to create a new character for this new experience. Sometimes you're asked to involve a character that exists, but you don't actually have any characters currently. And in those instances, you again should create a new character. There are 2 types of characters, mortals and immortals. These are exactly what they sound like. Characters with an implied timeline attached to them, and characters who don't have that limitation. When you're dealing with those mortal characters, it's important to remember the timeline that you're kind of keeping yourself in. If you find yourself hundreds of years in the future from where you started, from where you met these mortal characters, make sure you update them with either their age or the fact that they are long dead. When a character dies, you simply cross out their name. You're not supposed to kill a character unless directly told to do so by a prompt, unless it is because of the passing of time. Again, these immortal characters are supernatural characters, and you don't have to worry about them dying due to old age. The last of these traits that we have to talk about are marks. A mark is a visible indicator of your situation, something that shows people that you are undead in some way. This could be a wound that doesn't heal. This could be wings. This could be the fact that your head is on fire at all times. These marks don't go away, and you need to figure out some way of concealing them from the general public. If my head's always on fire, maybe I wear some sort of fireproof hat or helmet at all times to conceal that. They don't necessarily have to be as obvious as the ones that I mentioned. For example, your mark could be just the fact that you can turn into a bat or some other sort of animal or even another person. It's still a visual cue of your situation. So things like that are totally fine. With those terms out of the way, we can now talk about how you actually go about setting up the game. The setup is pretty quick, and it's part of the game, so you don't want to rush through it. For whatever reason, this is the part of the game that I found really intimidating. I think I bought this game like a year ago, and I was intimidated by the character creation part of it, so I put off trying the game for far too long. But again, the game walks you through it, and I'll walk you through it here too. At the end of character creation, you will have 5 memories, each with 1 experience in it, 3 skills, 3 resources, 3 mortal characters, and 1 immortal character, as well as your mark. You're going to start off by creating your first memory. And again, you'll do this by creating your first experience. This experience will be a little bit different from your other experiences in the game. This one is a broad summary of your life leading up to the point where you meet this immortal who changes you. You'll give yourself a name and you'll set up the setting of your story. Just as an example, my first experience that I created in my first playthrough was I am William, a baker born and raised in England in 1328. Really simple, just sets the timeline, the location, who I am, and I chose to add in that I'm a baker. That's what my character has done historically. After you create that first experience, you want to create 3 mortal characters. In my case, I chose my character's wife, their son, and their mentor, the person who taught them how to bake. I was really leaning into that little tidbit about them being a baker, which I initially thought was going to be so insignificant, but it ended up being the whole story. And that was entirely organic. I didn't plan for that at all. It's just when the prompts came up, I kept finding little ways that I could tie it in. As a reminder, the description of these mortals should be just a few words, just their name and what their relationship is to you at this point. Remember, you can add to these later. And also remember that these are mortal characters and they may not be around for very long. These initial 3 should be very important people in your character's life. Now that you know who you are and you know who some of the people around you are, you got to create 3 skills and 3 resources. Things that your character is capable of and things that they own. Again, using my first playthrough as an example, I had added that he was humorous, he was good at baking, and for some unknown reason, I had listed that he was a fast runner. Sure. And then for resources, I said that they owned a rolling pin, a bakery with an upstairs apartment, and a small wooden figure of themselves. Again, at this point, I had no idea where the story was going to go, and I was just writing down the first thing that came to mind. I think that's the best approach you can go into this game with. Also, remember that you're setting the scene here, but there are no limits. You can, right off the bat, be some emperor or some warlord. You can command an entire army, and that army can be your resource. I chose to be a small-time baker, and again, I don't know why, but that's fine. There is no limit to what you can do here. In the next step of character creation, the story really starts to take form. The goal here is to take these traits that you've just created, right? Those characters, skills, and resources all being under that umbrella term of traits. And you're going to combine them by way of creating new experiences. Again, these experiences should live in their own memories. I connected the mentor and the bakery that I own by saying that the mentor was very sick and he was giving me the key to the bakery. And that's why I own the bakery and I live in the upstairs apartment. In another experience, I said that my son had taken up whittling and he had carved me that wooden figure of myself. I mentioned here in this experience that that wooden figure is very important to me now and that I'll always keep it with me. And then for the third experience, I just said that I was using the rolling pin to bake something. Again, really simple, insignificant, but I'm connecting the fact that, yeah, I'm a baker and I have a rolling pin. Sure. Again, my experiences are super simple here and they're very low stakes, but you can do anything here. The only thing you can't do is that you don't want to get rid of these resources and these skills and these characters in these first experiences. Don't do that unless the book tells you to do that. And finally, we create the immortal, the person who is responsible for turning us into this undead being that we are for the remainder of the game. As we create that immortal, we're creating a fifth experience to a fifth memory, and we will also be creating our mark. Just to continue with my example, I had said that my immortal was Lord Blaine, a celiac, and a vampire. The experience that I used to tie that vampire in with my story was that he came into my shop, he wanted something to eat, all I had was bread and other baked goods, and him being a celiac, he couldn't eat any. He was very offended by this. I pointed him to the door. He bit me in the hand. The mark being that his tooth came off in my hand and was permanently embedded there, and that the wound never healed. I chose to conceal this simply by keeping my hand wrapped in fresh bandages at all times. And that's it. Character created. It really doesn't take very long to get into the game. And now we're finally ready to learn how the game is actually played. And really, it is so simple. I mentioned that we need 2 dice to play the game. One 10-sided die and one 6-sided die. Again, these are available through countless apps and websites, so don't worry about, if you don't have the physical dice, you don't have to go out and buy them. You can if you want, but really that's all you need. At this point in the experience, we've only made it through this much of the book. All of these pages, it's about 80 pages, are filled with the prompts that are going to help us tell our story. You're going to open the book up to this very first prompt, and then you're going to roll both of the dice. You'll take whatever you roll on your D10, the 10-sided die, and you'll subtract from that whatever you rolled on your D6, the 6-sided die. If I roll a 7 on the D10 and I roll a 6 on the D6, I subtract that 6 from that 7 and I'm left with 1, meaning I move forward 1 space. Again, you start on the first prompt. You don't have to answer that prompt though, it's just your starting point. So I would move from page 1 to page 2. Each page is filled with 3 prompts. And that's because if I'm here on page 2 and I roll a 5 on the D10 and a 5 on the D6, that comes out to a 0. So I just don't move, meaning I land back on the same page where I already am, but I've already answered the first prompt on the page, so I now will answer the second prompt on the page. This is also important because you can move forwards and backwards through the pages. If I subtract my D6 from my D10 and I end up with a negative number, I will move backwards a set number of pages, never moving beyond page 1 because there's nothing there. So when you're going back and forth, you may end up on the same page more than one time. And if that happens again, you just answer the next prompt on the page that you haven't answered yet. If you land on the same page a 4th time, the book says to just turn the page, go to the next prompt. In my experience, that never happened. I think I landed on the same page 3 times once, but I never made it there a 4th time in the same story. The fact that there are 80 pages of prompts in this book means that there's a lot of variability, and you're never getting the same experience as you play through. So there's a ton of replayability here. So you roll the dice, you move forwards or backwards a certain number of pages, and then you read the topmost prompt that you haven't yet responded to, and you respond to it. That response is in the form of a new experience. When you write that experience, if it is relevant to any existing memory, you will put that experience in that memory. This is one of those points where if you're using pen and paper, it's hard to gauge how much space you'll need for each memory. So I ended up with a lot of wasted blank space on some of the pages. And then on other pages, I ran out of room before I could finish filling out a memory. If I was using a laptop, that wouldn't be a problem. And again, if I'm writing a new experience and it's irrelevant to the existing memories that I have, or my existing memories are already all full of experiences, I have to create a new out of memory. It's a sick out of memory. But you can't do that without removing a previous out of memory. To do that, all you have to do is choose an experience, kind of at random, but I was trying to do it with whatever made sense. So the memory that was most distant or least impactful to my character's life is the one that I would ditch first. So you just cross that out, and then you can create a new fifth memory. There are even some prompts that will just have you erase a memory entirely, even if you didn't have to, which is brutal. As you flip through the pages and you answer these prompts, you will be told to check a skill here or remove a skill here. Checking it, you just add a check mark to say that you did that thing. Removing it, you just cross it out. That's gone, that's forgotten. Similarly, you'll be asked to gain new skills or lose resources or gain new resources. You will meet new characters. You will have old characters die. And all of this is happening through creative writing, through you writing down a quick little blurb about this happened, this is how it impacted me and those around me. If at any point you're asked to check or remove a skill and you don't have any skills, you instead have to remove a resource. Same goes for resources. If you are asked to remove a resource but you're out of resources already, you have to check a skill. When this happens, it's considered a critical failure, and you have to choose kind of the worst possible outcome to whatever prompt that you're responding to. If you're asked to check or remove a skill or to remove a resource, or if the game just tells you that the game is over, the game is over. When you do get to the point when you have to remove a memory, but you feel very strongly that that memory is a core memory of your vampire and that they wouldn't simply forget it, you have the option to put it in a diary. This diary is something that you can create at any time. The way you create the diary is really simple. You just write the word diary next to a memory instead of crossing it out. And then you can create kind of a sixth memory, or your fifth memory at that point. Since this one is no longer taking up space in your brain, it's now a physical item. It's now a resource. And since it is a physical item, you are going to add it to your resources list. So you'll go to your resource list and you'll write diary dash trip to the hospital, whatever a little summary is that will let you know which memory to go to. Or if you've numbered your memories, you can just write diary dash and then M17 or whatever. This being a resource, it is something that you can lose. So even though you've written it down, it's still not a permanent fixture of your character necessarily. You still might lose this resource. You can only ever create one diary at a time, but if you lose that diary, you can create a new one in the future. In one of my playthroughs, for example, I had a long-standing rivalry with some family. They had wronged me, I had wronged them, and hundreds of years had passed, and I had formed a lot of new memories. And when it was time to forget about that, I chose to take the memory of that rivalry and I put that into a diary. Soon after doing that, I got a prompt that said that I was bumping into a descendant of somebody that I used to know. So I chose to make that descendant a member of this family that I had a rivalry with. And I was able to do that because I preserved that diary entry. If I didn't do that, those characters would have been forgotten and I wouldn't have been able to do that. So that would have changed that part of the story drastically. Later down the line, my character had run out of money and I had to find a way to make that money back. And it had been hundreds of years, so I chose to sell that diary. All the little pieces of the game really come back into play in a way that feels really natural and organic, and that's part of the beauty of this game, the way that it was designed and developed. Everything that you're going through, it feels unrelated. If you're just flipping through the pages and you're reading the prompts, it's just, it's a smattering of prompts, but they were very carefully curated, and I never felt like I wasn't able to do something, or I didn't have a good answer for this, or I was stuck on how to come up with an answer for this prompt. It felt really natural. The story just kind of flows out of you as you go through these pages. It's true that sometimes I would create a new experience and it would land in a memory by itself, and pretty soon after that I would decide that that was irrelevant and I did cross it out. But more often than not, it came into play in a way that was really interesting and unexpected. It also helps that the book takes time to remind you that overthinking is unhelpful. Like I said, some of the experiences you'll create will come in and out of your vampire's memory, insignificant in the passing of time, and that's fine. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't think that hard on any of these prompts. Do what feels natural. Do whatever your first thought is, just write that down. If it matters, the game will just naturally bring it back. You're told to just cede control to the game and to let the game make you uncomfortable. And I think that's really good advice, because sometimes you have to do something that you are morally against, or you have to do something that feels horrible and gross and something that you don't want to do, but that's the essence of the game in a way. If the only option is to abandon or kill someone that your vampire cares about, write that into the story, and it adds so much to it. Some of what you go through in this game will really hit you. It's surprisingly impactful, even if you're not a writer. You don't consider yourself a writer. You don't consider yourself a storyteller. It somehow doesn't matter. I think this game is really good at evoking this creativity from the player. And on that note of not really being a writer, I really want to make it clear that that doesn't matter. The game will outline two ways of playing. There's the quick game, which is pretty much what I've been describing here. Those quick sentences of, this is what happened, this is how it impacted me. That's essentially the quick game, and all of what I said falls under that category. It also falls under the second category, which is the journaling game, but the journaling game adds in more long-form responses. You're told to write paragraphs on your responses and really go into full detail of the story that is unfolding. But you still create those experiences. You still create those memories in the game, and you still interact with those and the skills and the resources in the same way. You're just encouraged to journal out the entire story instead of just little blurbs. And even though you have that journal, it's still not really part of your character's memories. So it's just open-ended. It's just a way for the game to encourage you to write as much as you want if you do want to write a lot. But know that you really can write so little when you go through this game. I found myself writing really brief descriptions of what happened and then embellishing it in my brain. So I would write, I met this person, they were nice. But then in my brain, I was kind of going through the whole situation and I was picturing the whole thing. Because when you play this quick game, you can really start and finish the game in an hour or, maybe a couple of hours, depending on how you roll the dice. For one of my games, I was rolling very high on my D10 and very low on my D6. So I ended up turning the page quite a bit and I got through the game in well under an hour. But I imagine with opposite luck, you will be going back just as much as you'll be going forwards, and I could see the game taking a long time, which is also really cool, and you should, again, let that happen. Let the game take as long as the game takes, because a story will unfold. Those 3 prompts per page really comes into play in that kind of scenario. All of these prompts kind of interweaving amongst themselves to create this comprehensive narrative. It's really such a wild experience. And really the last thing you have to think about when you're playing the game is the passage of time. Again, using my first playthrough as an example, I think I had hit like 10 prompts and I was still in the same era. I still had all of the same people and I was still, I had moved towns at one point, but I was still of an age that it was realistic for my character to be alive. And then I turned the page and one of my prompts just told me that I fell asleep for 100 years and everybody that I know is gone. And I had to cross out each of my 15 characters that I had created at that point. They were all just gone. And I had to kind of reinvent my character because the prompt told me to reinvent yourself. You have a new name now. You move to a different area. And the whole game was different, but I still had these core memories from 100 years ago. So my character was still going through the grief of losing these 15 characters, some of whom were his family. And I'm glad I hit that prompt because I wasn't yet comfortable with the fact that you can really jump through the timeline at whatever pace you choose. The book does say that for the first 7 or 8 prompts, you can consider that time the first few busy years of your new life as a vampire. But then from there, you really want to kind of play with time. So you'll hit a new prompt and maybe you'll just decide, okay, maybe this prompt is happening 500 years in the future when the social norms are completely different than how they were when this character was first turned into an immortal. So I can do something that's completely different because it wasn't allowed back then, but now it is. Using another one of my own examples, at one point, one of my stories, I had decided that my character was gay, and then that they were in the early 1800s, and that was absolutely, not an accepted part of the society where they lived. And I was prompted that something in the law had changed, and how does that impact my character? And so I looked up when in this part of the world was same-sex marriage legalized, and I found that, and I did a time jump, and I just decided that, okay, now I'm there, and now my character feels a little more free to be who they are. Even though they are in this undead state, they are still now able to, for the first time in their, at this point, like, I don't know how many years they had been alive at that point. I think it was like 500 or 800 years. Now they are finally free to practice love for the first time openly, which was just such a cool thought experiment that I never would have gone down that rabbit hole if it wasn't for this game. It was wild. And that kind of touches on something that gave me a little pause before I started this game. I am not a history buff in any sense of the words. I don't know anything about history. I didn't pay attention in history class. I'm not wired like that. It's just a part of me. It's just not my thing. History is just not my thing. And this game, it feels like it's trying to put you in the past, right? And if you look through the artwork in this book, it feels like you're supposed to be in the 1800s or the 1400s or, whatever. It's called the 1,000-year-old vampire. So you kind of picture that it happens over the course of 1,000 years, and you feel like that's 1,000 years ago. But I found a few ways to kind of get around this hesitancy with this game, to kind of overcome my fear of being kind of lost in the history. The first thing is to just remember that it doesn't matter. This is a game. Do whatever you want. It's a game about a vampire too. So if you write down something that happens that is historically inaccurate, nobody cares. Nobody's ever going to know that because unless you're me reading some of your responses to your prompts here in this video, probably nobody will ever know what happened in your playthrough of the 1,000-year-old vampire. This is a solo role-playing game. Nobody cares. But beyond that, it doesn't have to be this Earth. It can be a different timeline in a different universe, a different version of history where maybe whatever you just said happened, and that's fine. It's a fantasy setting, and it does not have to be based in reality. Going even further than that, this doesn't have to take place in the past. I think intuitively it feels like it takes place in the past, but nowhere in this book does it say that it has to. You could set this book in the future. It can start 1,000 years from now and continue for thousands of years after that point. It can start on a different planet. It can start on a spaceship. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be bound by anything. But if you do want to keep it here on Earth and you do want to keep it in the past, that's awesome. That's great. Do that. Go for it. You can either use the knowledge that you have, or you can use this book as a tool to motivate you to research a time period. If you are interested in, right now I'm reading Between Two Fires, and this takes place during the bubonic plague. I don't know much about that, but that's a really cool topic. So my first character, the baker, that was during the bubonic plague times in England. And I was able to look up what the experience was like and kind of tailor my story around that, which was really cool. And then going even beyond that, if you don't care really, but you do want it to be accurate, this is, I think, the best use for ChatGPT that I have ever found. I was able to just open up ChatGPT and type in the time period that I chose, the location that I chose, and just said, what was the state of France in 1486? And I got a long printout of whatever that was. And then I responded and I said 10 words or less. And then when I skipped ahead into the future, I said, what happened 500 years later? What happened over the course? What's a summary of how did politics change or social norms change over this time period? And that was a really easy way to work my way through this story without having to do a ton of research. So really don't let that hold you back. Once you're done with your playthroughs and you want something more, then you can just turn to the back and there's over 100 I think 135 additional prompts. That's crazy. I don't know if I'll ever get to the point where I need all of these, but there's a ton in here. And they even have at the end of the book a description of how you might play this with a group of people. I haven't really read through that, but if that's something you're into, it does exist. You can totally look into that and see, you know, how you might play this with a group of people. Again, I don't really know how that would work, but I trust this designer. If they say it can be done, I'm sure it can be done. And that is it. I think that's it. That's all I'm gonna say for today about this game. I really had a great time playing this game. You don't, again, need the physical copy here to get the most out of this experience. I think $15 will get you the PDF on their website, and I really recommend checking it out. Even if this is your first solo journaling RPG. I had only played a couple before I picked this one up, and really the barrier to entry is so low. As long as you have your brain and you're willing to be a little creative and a little vulnerable and do a little bit of you know, very light writing, I think you'd have a fantastic time picking this up, especially if you're into vampires or fantasy in any regard, which if you're here, I think you probably are. So thank you so much for watching. Again, this is the first time I'm talking about any sort of game on the channel. If you didn't like the format, if you think I talked too much about certain things or not enough about other parts of the game, and you have tips for how I might make this sort of content better, let me know. If you don't want this kind of content on this channel, also feel free to let me know. Although I do think I want to do this at least a few more times over the next few months, because again, this is something that I specifically very much enjoy. Playing these games and talking about them is something that I very much enjoy. So you can expect at least a few more of these kinds of videos, but I promise I won't overtake the channel with this, especially if I get a ton of comments saying this is really not your kind of content. But I had a really good time. And thank you so much for hanging out. Have you played this game? Do you plan on picking it up after watching this? Have you played any other solo RPG kind of games? I haven't played many, and I would love your recommendations. Let me know down in the comments, and I will see you next week. Bye.